2,000 people died over a bucket. Not a bucket of gold, not a bucket of diamonds. A wooden bucket, the kind you'd use to draw water from a well. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not using some clever metaphor. In the year 1325, two Italian city-states went to full-scale war, fielded armies of over 30,000 soldiers each, fought one of the largest battles of the entire medieval period, and at the center of it all was a literal oak bucket. This is one of the most absurd, most overlooked, and most genuinely insane stories in all of human history, and the fact that most people have never heard of it is honestly a crime. So today we're going to fix that. This is the story of the War of the Bucket. To understand how a bucket could cause a war, you first need to understand that medieval Italy was, to put it politely, an absolute disaster. Forget the unified country you see on a map today. In the 1300s, Italy was a patchwork of independent city-states, and these city-states were constantly at each other's throats. We're talking Florence versus Pisa, Venice versus Genoa, Milan versus basically everyone. These weren't just petty rivalries, these were blood feuds that lasted for generations. But the biggest divide, cutting through all of Italian politics at the time, was the conflict between two factions known as the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Now, these names sound fancy, but the core idea is pretty simple. The Guelphs supported the Pope and papal authority. The Ghibellines supported the Holy Roman Emperor, and these two factions absolutely despised each other. Every city in northern Italy was aligned with one side or the other, and if your neighbor picked the opposite team, well, that was basically a declaration that you were enemies for life. This is where our two main characters enter the story. Bologna, a wealthy, prestigious city and home to one of the oldest universities in the entire world, was firmly in the Guelph camp. They were Team Pope, through and through. And then, just about 30 miles to the northwest, sat Modena, smaller, scrappier, and defiantly Ghibelline. Team Emperor all the way. These two cities shared a border, shared trade routes, and shared an absolutely venomous hatred of each other that had been building for decades. Skirmishes, raids, political assassinations, you name it. The tension between Bologna and Modena was a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. Or, as it turned out, a bucket. So here's what happened. In 1325, a group of Modenese soldiers carried out a raid into Bolognese territory. Now, raids like this weren't exactly unusual. Both sides had been poking at each other for years. But this particular raid went a little further than most. The Modenese soldiers pushed deep into Bologna's territory, reportedly right up to the city gates, and in an act of supreme, deliberate disrespect, they stole a wooden bucket from a well in the center of the city. Some accounts say it was from the main civic well in the heart of Bologna. Others say it was from a well near one of the city gates. But the details don't really matter. What matters is the message. See, this wasn't about the bucket itself. Nobody needed that bucket. This was the medieval equivalent of walking into your rival's house, taking something off their mantle, and walking out while making direct eye contact. It was a taunt, a humiliation, a way of saying, we walked right into your city, took whatever we wanted, and there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. For Bologna, one of the richest and most powerful cities in all of Italy, this was an unforgivable insult. Their pride had been wounded, and in medieval Italy, wounded pride meant war. Bologna demanded the bucket back. Modena refused. And just like that, diplomacy was over. Bologna began assembling its army, calling on its Guelph allies across northern Italy. They were not going to let this stand. They were going to crush Modena, retrieve their bucket, and restore their honor. The only problem was that Modena had absolutely no intention of giving it back. What happened next was shockingly large in scale. Bologna, furious and out for blood, assembled a massive force. We're talking about 32,000 soldiers by most estimates. That is an enormous army by medieval standards. To put that in perspective, the famous Battle of Crecy, one of the defining battles of the 100 Years' War, involved roughly the same number of troops, and that was a conflict between the kingdoms of England and France. Bologna was fielding a royal-sized army over a bucket, but Modena wasn't sitting around waiting to be destroyed. They called on their own Ghibelline allies, and managed to assemble a force of around 7,000 soldiers. Now, on paper, this looks completely lopsided. Bologna outnumbered Modena by more than 4-1. This should have been a massacre, and it was. Just not in the direction anyone expected. On November 15, 1325, the two armies met at a place called Zappolino, a small town in the hills between the two cities. And despite being massively outnumbered, Modena won. They didn't just win. They routed Bologna's entire army. The Modenese forces, led by a brilliant military commander named Passerino Bonacolsi, the Lord of Mantua who had allied with Modena, executed a devastating cavalry charge that shattered Bologna's lines. The Bolognese army, despite its size, was poorly organized and overconfident. When the Modenese cavalry hit their flanks, panic spread through the ranks like wildfire. The retreat turned into a full-blown rout. Bolognese soldiers fled the battlefield in chaos, and the Modenese army pursued them mercilessly. By the time the dust settled, an estimated 2,000 soldiers lay dead on the field and in the surrounding countryside. 2,000 lives gone in a single afternoon of carnage. And the Modenese forces didn't stop there. Riding their momentum, they pushed all the way to the walls of Bologna itself, burning farms and villages along the way. Some accounts even claim that the victorious Modenese soldiers held mock games and tournaments outside Bologna's gates, just to rub salt in the wound. It was one of the most humiliating military defeats in Bologna's history, and it all started because of a bucket. Now you might expect that after such a devastating defeat, something dramatic would have changed. Maybe Bologna surrendered, maybe Modena became the dominant power in the region. But this is medieval Italy, and nothing ever ends cleanly. The truth is, the War of the Bucket didn't really resolve anything. Despite winning the battle, Modena didn't have the strength to actually conquer Bologna. They couldn't breach the city walls. And despite losing 2,000 men and suffering a catastrophic humiliation, Bologna was still a wealthy, powerful city with deep resources and powerful allies. The conflict eventually sputtered out, as many medieval Italian wars did, with neither side achieving a decisive victory. Borders barely changed. Political alliances shifted as they always did. The Guelph and Ghibelline conflict continued to rage across Italy for decades. In the grand scheme of things, the War of the Bucket changed almost nothing about the balance of power in northern Italy. But here's the thing. Here's the part that makes this story legendary. Modena kept the bucket. They never gave it back. Not after the war ended. Not after peace treaties were signed. Not after decades passed. Not after centuries passed. That stolen oak bucket remained in Modena as a trophy, a symbol of their victory, a permanent reminder of the day they humiliated mighty Bologna. And if you visit Modena today, right now, in the 21st century, you can still see it. The bucket is on display in the Torre della Ghirlandina, the bell tower of Modena's cathedral. It's been sitting there for nearly 700 years. 700 years, and Bologna still hasn't gotten their bucket back. Now it's easy to laugh at this story, and honestly, you should. The idea that 2,000 people died because of a bucket is objectively absurd, but there's actually a deeper lesson buried in all of this ridiculousness. The bucket wasn't really the cause of the war. It was the excuse. Bologna and Modena had been rivals for decades. The Guelph-Ghibelline conflict had poisoned relations between cities across all of Italy. Economic competition, territorial disputes, and political grudges had been piling up for years. The bucket was simply the final straw, the incident so provocative, so insulting, that it gave Bologna the justification to launch the war they'd been itching to fight anyway. And if you think about it, this pattern repeats throughout all of history. Wars are rarely about what they claim to be about. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand didn't cause World War I. Decades of imperial rivalry, military alliances, and nationalistic tension caused World War I. The Archduke's assassination was just the spark that lit a fuse that had been laid down years before. Same thing here. The bucket was the spark. The fuse had been burning for a long time, but still, it was a bucket. And that's what makes this story unforgettable. So there you have it, the War of the Bucket. A conflict so absurd it sounds like it was made up, but every word of it is true. 32,000 soldiers mobilized, 2,000 dead, and at the end of it all, a single wooden pail sitting in a bell tower in Modena, where it remains to this very day. History is full of stories like this, moments that are simultaneously hilarious and horrifying, where the pettiness of human pride collides with the brutal reality of war. And if you enjoyed this one, I've got plenty more where that came from. If you liked this video, smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. If you're new here and you want more stories about the wildest, weirdest, and most unbelievable moments in history, go ahead and hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What's the pettiest reason you've ever seen someone start a fight? And do you think Bologna should finally get their bucket back after 700 years? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.